Welcome to the Riddles and Secrets of History channel. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Welcome to a fascinating journey into the depths of antiquity, to the Sumerians, one of the most mysterious and influential civilizations, which you have surely heard of but know far from everything about. Today, we will talk about the gods, heroes, ancient legends, and mysteries that surrounded this amazing people. You will learn how the Sumerians imagined the world, who they worshipped, why they believed that humans were created only to serve higher powers, and how their mythology influenced all subsequent cultures, from Babylon to biblical texts. We will also touch upon the Anunnaki, the mysterious gods whom some today associate with theories of ancient aliens. Is this true, or just a fantasy? Today, we will try to find the answer. So, get comfortable, we are beginning. The Sumerians are an ancient people who, in the 3rd millennium BC, created one of the world's first civilizations. They lived in the southern part of Mesopotamia, in the territory of modern-day Iraq, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These lands are called the Fertile Crescent. Here, there was rich soil that allowed the Sumerians to grow grain and support large settlements. The first settlements in this region appeared as early as the 5th millennium BC, but it was the Sumerians who turned them into true city-states. Uruk, Lagash, and Nippur were independent states, each with its own ruler, army, laws, and patron god. At the center of each city rose a ziggurat, a huge, multi-tiered temple where priests conducted rituals and made sacrifices to the gods. The Sumerians left no written records of their origin, and it is still unknown where they came from. Their language is unlike any other ancient language, which makes them even more mysterious. Perhaps they were the local inhabitants of Mesopotamia, or perhaps they came from other regions. The Sumerians were not only city builders but also inventors. They created the world's first writing system, cuneiform. Their texts were written with sharpened reeds on soft clay tablets, which were then dried in the sun or fired in a kiln. Thanks to these tablets, we know how the Sumerians lived, what laws they had, and what myths and legends they told. It was the Sumerians who invented the sexagesimal system for telling time, which we still use today. They created the first financial system, kept tax records, invented wheeled carts, and the first primitive mechanisms for irrigating fields. But their main legacy is their mythology. Their gods were the real rulers of the universe, controlling the destinies of people. They believed that the gods created the world and then gave it to humans, but not out of kindness, but so that they would do the hard work instead of the gods. The Sumerians did not just create some of the first myths in human history, their religious beliefs became the foundation for the beliefs of the peoples who succeeded them. After the decline of the Sumerian civilization, their lands were conquered by the Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. They adopted the Sumerian gods, changed their images, but did not forget the myths themselves. The Babylonian god Marduk, the chief god of the pantheon, was originally just one of the second-tier Sumerian gods, but he was later made the powerful creator of the world, pushing the former gods aside. This process is clearly visible in the Enigma Elish, the Babylonian creation myth, which is based on Sumerian ideas but gives them a new form. In the Assyrian religion, the gods became even more warlike. Enlil, the Sumerian god of storms and fate, receded into the background among the Babylonians, but among the Assyrians, his place was taken by the god Ashur, a formidable and merciless lord associated with military victories and the state. But the most surprising thing is the influence of Sumerian myths on biblical texts. the story of the Great Flood, described in the Book of Genesis, almost completely repeats the plot of the Sumerian myth of Ziusudra, who survived a great flood by building an ark. This same plot migrated to the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the main hero meets Utnapishtim, a man who received immortality after the gods decided to destroy humanity with a flood. The only difference is in the details. In the Old Testament, the savior of people was Noah. In the Babylonian version, it is Utnapishtim, and in the Sumerian original, Ziusudra. Even the concept of the afterlife in ancient Israel has echoes of Sumerian beliefs. In Sumerian mythology, the souls of the dead go to the underworld, where they dwell in dusty darkness, and their fate depends on the burial rites performed by the living. Later Jewish ideas about Sheol, a joyless place where all souls go, resonate with the Sumerian world of the dead. Biblical images of heroes may also be rooted in Sumerian texts. For example, Nimrod, the mighty hunter and king whom the Bible associates with the building of Babylon, may be a reflection of real Sumerian rulers, or the mythical Gilgamesh, the ruler of Uruk, who, according to legend, performed great feats, confronted the gods, and sought immortality. Knowledge of Sumerian myths has come down to us not through oral traditions or later retellings, but thanks to one of the greatest technological revolutions of antiquity, the invention of cuneiform. The Sumerians were the first in history to record their myths and legends on clay tablets. For this, they used a sharpened reed stylus to press wedge-shaped marks into soft clay. These tablets were then sun-dried or fired in a kiln to preserve the text. This allowed Sumerian myths to survive for millennia. Ancient scribes not only recorded religious texts but also created archives and libraries, turning stories into a repository of knowledge. As a result, many Sumerian tales were rewritten by the Babylonians and Assyrians, which helped them reach our days. One of the most important sources of Sumerian mythology is the Library of Ashurbanipal, a grand collection of cuneiform tablets found in the ruins of the ancient Nineveh palace. This library contained texts that retold Sumerian legends, but in a Babylonian interpretation. The most famous Sumerian text is the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest literary poem, which tells of the adventures of the king of Uruk, his quest for immortality, and his encounters with heroes of the past. It tells of the god Enki, the flood, the goddess Inanna, and the kingdom of the dead. All this makes the epic the most important source for Sumerian mythology. For the Sumerians, the world did not appear out of nothing. It was not created by the will of a single deity, as in later religions. It was born from chaos, from primordial forces that existed long before the appearance of gods, the earth, and even time itself. First of all, there was the ocean, an endless abyss in which there was neither light nor land. In these waters slumbered the primordial energy of the universe. This was a place where nothing had yet taken form, but the possibility of everything's emergence was already hidden. In the very beginning, there was only Abzu, the boundless ocean of fresh water. He was a primordial being, a living embodiment of the chaotic element. Abzu contained the power from which everything could be born, but he himself remained motionless and unchanging. Somewhere deeper was hidden a second abyss, Tiamat, the saltwater ocean. Together, they formed the primordial chaos. Later, this concept would be reflected in the myths of Babylon and then in the biblical stories of the waters of the deep. In this state of eternal slumber, at some point, the first gods emerged from these waters. Their birth was not the result of someone's design, they simply arose like sparks from a fire. Among them were En, the embodiment of the sky, and Ki, the essence of the earth. They were not yet separated from each other but were a single whole, enclosed in chaos. For the world to exist, the sky and the earth had to be torn apart, and chaos had to be brought to order. When an Enki, sky and earth, separated, space appeared. But the earth itself remained empty and barren. It was like a piece of clay without form. It is here that one of the most important goddesses of Sumerian mythology, Ninhursag, comes into play. Ninhursag's name means Lady of the Mountain, and in ancient texts, she is described as the great creator of landscapes. It was she who sculpted the first hills and highlands, separated the land from the water, and created places where rivers could flow. It was her labor that prepared the world for the emergence of life. The Sumerians did not imagine the creation of the world as an instantaneous act, as in the biblical tradition. Their cosmogony is more like a craft, a long process requiring strength and skill. Ninhursag acted like a master potter, transforming formless chaos into an organized space. But this was not enough. The world was still unsettled, barren, and empty. It was necessary to establish order, create the structure of the universe, determine who would rule this world, and how it would exist. And was the God of the sky, infinite, cold, and distant. He existed above all things, was the source of divine power, but rarely interfered in the affairs of the world. Ki was the goddess of the earth, solid, fertile, and full of life. Together, they formed the foundation of the universe, but for now, they remained a single whole. Their separation did not happen by itself, it was an act of force, a willful step that had consequences. It is here that a new important character in Sumerian mythology appears, Enlil. Enlil was the son of an Enki, but unlike his father, he was not detached. He was the force of wind, storms, and movement. Enlil could not tolerate the stillness between the undivided sky and earth. He tore the connection between an Enki, raised the sky up, and pressed the earth down. This moment in Sumerian mythology can be compared to the separation of light and darkness, chaos and order, in the myths of other cultures. Enlil gave the world the opportunity to exist in the form we know it. But with the separation of the universe, a struggle for power began. Enlil, who took on the role of the creator of order, declared himself the supreme god. But he was not the only contender for the throne. Parallel to him existed Enki, the god of wisdom, water, and secret knowledge. Enki was not a warrior, but he possessed cunning, deep wisdom, and an understanding of the very essence of things. While Enlil established laws, Enki knew how to bypass them, how to change reality itself without brute force. These two gods became the main forces of the Sumerian pantheon. Their struggle determined the fates of gods, people, and the entire earth. Enlil demanded order, Enki sought hidden paths. Ki gave life, and remained far above in the heavens, watching what was happening below. After getting acquainted with the Sumerians' idea of the creation of the world, let's take a closer look at the Sumerian pantheon. At the very top of the universe was An, the greatest and most incomprehensible god, the Lord of the boundless sky. He did not interfere in the affairs of mortals, did not descend to earth, and did not participate in the intrigues of other gods. His power was absolute, but he ruled from afar, from a distant star shining on high. He was the source of divine power, it was from him that the authority of all other gods came. Without his approval, no one could be considered a legitimate ruler. In ancient texts, his name was used as a symbol of supreme power, but he himself rarely appeared in myths. He was a god to whom not people, but only gods turned when the fates of the universe were being decided. His throne was at the very top of the firmament, in the highest of the celestial worlds. But although he was considered the father of the gods, his power was more symbolic. He did not rule the world directly but delegated this role to others. That is why his children, above all Enlil, became the main acting forces. Enlil did not just rule the world, he guarded it, ensuring that everything happened according to the established order, that the gods received sacrifices, and that people fulfilled their role. But if someone violated this order, Enlil was merciless. One of the most striking examples of his wrath was the Great Flood, an event that the Sumerians described long before the biblical story of Noah. In this myth, Enlil decided to wipe humanity off the face of the earth. In Sumerian myths, humans appeared not as the beloved creations of the gods, but as their servants. They had to work for the gods, build temples, bring sacrifices, and glorify their heavenly masters. Humans performed the heavy labor that the gods themselves used to have to do. But over time, their numbers grew, and with them, the noise they created increased. The Sumerian gods were like kings, and it annoyed them that the earth was full of shouts, conversations, and the din of people. One myth says that Enlil, in anger, complained to the other gods, "The people are noisy, their voices disturb my sleep." And then he decided to destroy them once and for all. He convinced them that humanity was too restless and needed to be wiped from the face of the earth. So the gods decided to send a great flood to the earth, which would swallow the cities, destroy the crops, drown the livestock, and wash away all civilization. But not all the gods agreed with this decision. Enki, the god of water and wisdom, was a friend to humans. He did not want them to perish, but he could not openly oppose Enlil. So he acted differently. Enki chose one man, the righteous king Ziusadra, who was the prototype of Noah. He appeared to him in a dream and warned him of the coming catastrophe: demolish your house and build a ship. Take with you the seeds of all plants and all the animals that are on the earth. When the flood comes, you will save life. Ziusadra followed the advice and built a huge ship. When the flood began, waters poured from the heavens and flooded the entire land. The myth tells that the flood lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. The waves were so high that even the tops of the ziggurats were hidden under the water. People drowned, cities were destroyed, and it seemed that all life on earth had ended. But the ship of Ziusadra survived. When the waters began to recede, Ziusadra released a bird to check if it was possible to go out on dry land. When it did not return, he understood that the land had reappeared from under the water. But when Enlil found out that someone had survived, he became furious. He demanded an explanation: who dared to defy his will? Who saved the people he wanted to destroy? Enki did not hide the truth. He told Enlil that he could not allow humanity to perish completely. Enlil was angry at first, but then he admitted that although the flood had not destroyed humanity, it had taught them a lesson. The gods gave humans a new chance. As a reward for his righteousness, Ziusadra received immortality. The gods took him to distant lands where he could live forever, far from mortals. Among all the Sumerian gods, there is none more vibrant and contradictory than Inanna. In Akkadian mythology, she would become Ishtar, but her character and role would remain unchanged. She was the embodiment of life itself: love, passion, fertility, but also of war, destruction, and power. She was revered as the goddess who could make a king great, grant him victory, and bless the land with a harvest. But she was also feared because she could take everything away in an instant. Inanna ruled not only the heavens but also human hearts. In her temples, she was worshipped by kings and warriors, farmers and priests, sacred prostitutes, and ordinary people seeking her blessing. Her cult was special, unlike others. It was not built solely on fear of the goddess or on prayers for mercy. The worship of Inanna was life, emotions, and physicality. In her temples, music played, people sang and danced, performing sacred rituals that were meant to convey their devotion to the goddess. The rites in her honor were not limited to sacrifices, as with other gods. Entire plays and mysteries were dedicated to her, reenacting her myths, her love, and her passion. One of the most important rituals was the rite of sacred marriage. Every year during the spring festival, the king of Sumer entered into a symbolic union with Inanna. He was to become her lover, her chosen one. A solemn ceremony took place in the temple, during which the high priestess, representing the goddess herself, united with the king in a sacred act of divine and earthly union. This rite was considered necessary for the prosperity of the country. If the goddess accepted the king, the land became fertile, the harvest was rich, and the kingdom could prosper. But if he displeased her, it could mean drought, famine, disease, and war. The worship of Inanna also included a cult of priestesses who served in her temples. These women not only prayed and performed rites but also embodied the goddess herself. They were considered her earthly incarnations, her messengers. Their touch, their words, their dances, all were considered sacred, filled with the power of Inanna. The name of Inanna was written on clay tablets along with prayers and requests. She was depicted as a woman with lion's paws and wings, with a crown on her head, with a bow and arrows, ready to both protect and attack. But for all her power, Inanna was not immune to fate. Like any other being, she once had to face what lies beyond life, the world of death. The myth of Inanna's descent into the underworld is one of the most mysterious and dramatic stories of the ancient world. Why did the goddess who was the embodiment of life decide to go to the kingdom of the dead? Some versions say she wanted to claim power even where her sister Ereshkigal reigned. Others claim she went down to mourn the death of her husband, Dumuzid. Whatever the reason, her journey became a trial that changed the very course of the universe. Before setting off for the underworld, Inanna prepared herself. She knew it was a dangerous journey and ordered her faithful servant, Ninshubur, to wait for her for 3 days and 3 nights. If she did not return, he was to ask the great gods for help. Inanna adorned herself with 7 divine attributes: her crown, her scepter, her necklace, her golden bracelets, her belt, everything that symbolized her power and strength. She was ready to appear before the mistress of the dead in all her divine majesty. But when she approached the gates of the underworld and demanded to be let in, the gatekeeper hesitated. He relayed her request to Ereshkigal, who, smiling grimly, agreed, but with one condition: Inanna must enter as all the dead do, leaving her power behind the gates. At each of the 7 gates of the underworld, one item was taken from her. Her crown was left at the first gate, her scepter at the second. Her jewelry, clothing, and magical protection, everything was stripped from her until, having passed the last gate, she stood completely naked before her sister. Ereshkigal showed not a drop of mercy. She condemned her and ordered her killed. Inanna's body was hung on a hook, left in the darkness. On Earth, meanwhile, chaos began. Without Inanna, life began to fade. Without her, plants did not bloom, rivers did not flow, and children were not born. Ninshubur waited for 3 days and 3 nights and then went to the gods, asking for their help. Enlil refused to interfere, and did not want to go against the will of death. Only Enki, the wise god of water, found a way to save her. He created 2 spirits whom no one knew, beings who could pass into the underworld but belonged neither to the world of the living nor the world of the dead. They went to Ereshkigal's palace but did not demand Inanna's release. They simply listened. Ereshkigal was moaning in pain, complaining of her suffering, and then the spirits said to her, "We know what it is to suffer." For the first time in history, the goddess of death heard sympathy. She was so surprised that, in gratitude, she offered them any gift they desired. They asked to free Inanna. But no one can leave the world of the dead just like that. Inanna had to leave someone else in her place. She agreed. When she returned to Earth, her gaze fell upon Dumuzid, the god of vegetation and her beloved. He did not seem to be grieving, not praying for her return, not performing rituals in her honor. In a rage, Inanna pointed at him, and the servants of the underworld dragged him into the darkness. Later, Dumuzid's sister, the goddess Inanna, offered to share his fate. In the end, he spent half the year in the underworld and then returned to Earth, symbolizing the changing of the seasons. This myth is one of the most ancient stories of death and rebirth, about how it is impossible to escape the darkness. When the sun rose over the Sumerian cities, it was not just a new day beginning. The gaze of the god Utu returned to the earth. He was the embodiment of light, order, and truth. His bright face drove away the darkness and illuminated all the actions of people. Utu ruled the sun and justice. When his chariot rose into the sky, its rays penetrated the darkest corners of cities, into deep gorges, into closed houses. He saw everything, the honest merchant or the cheat, the wise ruler or the despot. No one could hide from his all-seeing eye. The Sumerians believed that it was Utu who judged people. He did not dispense mercy like Inanna or unleash fury like Enlil. His power was in justice. He protected those who acted honestly and exposed those who lived in lies. Sacrifices were made in his honor in temples, protection was sought in courts, and prayers were offered for a fair outcome in battles. But Utu was not just a judge, he was a traveler, a wayfarer who made his great celestial journey every day. In the morning, he emerged from the celestial gates and began his journey across the sky, illuminating the world. In the evening, he descended below the horizon to pass through the underworld at night. That is why he was also a guide for souls, one who could light the way for the dead, protecting them from the horrors of darkness. Myths about battles with demons and helping heroes are associated with him. Once, it was he who helped Gilgamesh, the great king of Uruk, by giving him a weapon capable of defeating the monstrous Humbaba. His light was always a symbol of protection, strength, and the unchanging order established by the gods. But if Utu was the light of day, then at night, the world belonged to another god, Inanna. If the Sumerian sun was the embodiment of law, then the moon personified mystery. Inanna, later called Sin, was the god of the moon, wisdom, magic, and prophecy. His light did not reveal truths like the sun's rays of Utu but, on the contrary, concealed them, leaving room for riddles and secrets. The Sumerians saw how the moon changed its appearance every night, from a thin crescent to a full disk and back to disappearance. Therefore, Inanna was considered the god of change, the cycle of time, the rhythms of life, and fate itself. Rulers and priests turned to him in their decisions, believing that it was he who revealed the future to those who could read the signs. Inanna was a wise and calm god. He did not interfere in people's affairs as actively as others, but his priests were the best astronomers and soothsayers in Sumer. They studied the phases of the moon, calculated the times for sowing and harvesting, and determined the best dates for battles and for laying the foundations of temples. In the darkness, under the mysterious light of the moon, lay the kingdom of Inanna. He traveled across the sky in his celestial boat, controlling the flow of time and the changing of tides. His main centers of worship were the cities of Ur and Haran, where majestic temples stood in which priests recorded prophecies on clay tablets. Inanna was considered the father of two great gods, the solar Utu and the warlike Inanna. Myths say that he passed on his wisdom to them. Utu received the ability to see the truth, and Inanna, the power of authority. But behind the moonlight, darkness always hides. As the god of the night, Inanna was also associated with the otherworldly realm, with dreams, omens, and secret knowledge. It was to him that magicians, astrologers, and rulers brought sacrifices, who in the shadows of the night, sought answers to their questions. When the sun rose, its light could illuminate the truth, but when the moon rose, answers could be found in the shadows. Among the majestic gods of the Sumerian pantheon, there were also those whose kingdom was beyond life. Nergal and Ereshkigal, the king and queen of the underworld, ruled the land of shadows, a world from which no one returned. Ereshkigal's kingdom was filled with eternal darkness. Here there was neither joy nor hope. This was a world where the souls of the dead wandered in eternal twilight. The Sumerian underworld was called Kor. It was located deep underground, beyond 7 gates leading into eternal darkness. The souls of the dead went there and stayed forever. Whoever once set foot in Kor lost everything that made them human. There was no joy here, no light, no sounds. The souls of the dead fed on dust and dirt, knowing neither hunger nor satiety. The entrance to the underworld was guarded by terrifying demons, the Gala, who would seize anyone who tried to escape. Even the gods could not simply leave this place, as proven by the myth of Inanna's descent, when she had to find a substitute to leave the world of the dead. But despite the horror of this place, it was not a realm of punishment. The souls did not suffer, they simply existed, losing their memory and becoming shadows of their former selves, existing in eternal monotony. Only those who received offerings from their living relatives, bread, water, oil, and clothing, could retain a small shadow of their former life. If they were forgotten, they disappeared completely, lost in the bottomless darkness. In contrast to Inanna, the goddess of passion and power, Ereshkigal was motionless and unchanging, like death itself. Little is known of her past, but Sumerian myths say she was once kidnapped and imprisoned in Kor. From that moment, she became its sole and eternal ruler. No one could challenge her, even the most powerful gods feared her. Her palace was deep in the underworld, surrounded by demons and the spirits of the dead. Here she sat on her throne, receiving the souls of the deceased and observing their bleak existence. She was not cruel, but no one expected mercy from her either. Her power lay in inevitability. She was death itself, which could not be appeased or deceived. But even the Queen of the Dead had her own tragedy. She lived in complete solitude. Unlike Inanna, who was surrounded by lovers, warriors, and priests, Ereshkigal ruled in emptiness. Perhaps that is why everything changed when Nergal came into her world. Nergal was not always the Lord of Death. He was the god of war, destruction, and plague, existing on the border between the world of the living and the world of the dead. He brought death but did not himself belong to Ereshkigal's realm, until one of the strangest stories in Sumerian mythology occurred. Once, a great feast of the gods was held in the heavens. All the deities came to pay homage to Anu, the lord of the skies, all except Ereshkigal. She could not leave her gloomy throne. So, the demon Namtar, her messenger, was sent to the feast to represent her. But when Namtar entered the hall, all the gods stood to greet the messenger of the Queen of the Dead, all except Nergal. He refused to bow before one who came from the world of the dead. Ereshkigal was offended and demanded that Nergal be brought to her for punishment. When he descended into Kor, Ereshkigal appeared before him, powerful, cold, but beautiful in her dark strength. She received him, but not as a prisoner. A strange, primal connection arose between them. Some versions of the myth say that Ereshkigal fell in love with him, in others, that they fought for power. She offered him to stay in Kor and rule with her, but Nergal was the god of war, and he was not going to become a prisoner of the dead. He waited for the right moment, attacked Ereshkigal, and escaped back to the world of the living, leaving her in a rage and alone. After his escape, Nergal returned to the heavens, but his victory was short-lived. Ereshkigal could not leave Kor, but her anger reached the gods. She declared that if Nergal did not return to her, she would destroy the entire world of the living. The gods were frightened. They could not allow Kor to swallow the whole world, so they ordered Nergal to return. But this time, he came not as a prisoner, but as a conqueror. Nergal descended into the underworld again, but now he did not ask for forgiveness. He entered Ereshkigal's throne room with weapons in hand, broke the gates of Kor, and killed her guards. When he reached her, the myths say he grabbed her by the hair, threw her from the throne, and prepared to kill her. But at that moment, Ereshkigal began to cry. She did not beg for mercy but said that all she wanted was not to be alone. She had reigned in Kor alone while the other gods enjoyed the world of the living. Now, she had met someone who could be her equal. Nergal looked at her, and instead of killing her, he kissed her. He understood that death cannot be defeated, one can only form an alliance with it. Thus, he became the king of the underworld, alongside Ereshkigal. He could no longer return to the world of the living. Now he was not just the god of war, but also the god of death. The Sumerians feared Kor, but they also tried to appease its rulers. In temples, sacrifices were made not only to the gods of life but also to Nergal, so that he would not send disease and destruction, and to Ereshkigal, so that she would not take souls too soon. Funerary rituals played an important role. Relatives brought offerings to the spirits of the deceased so that they would not go hungry in the underworld. The more respect a soul received from its descendants, the better its life was in Kor. Kings, priests, and magicians tried to predict how to avoid a premature death. Many Sumerians even left spells on their tombs to protect themselves after death and avoid falling into eternal oblivion. But no matter how hard they tried, no person could escape Kor. All roads led there. The Anunnaki, divine council and modern myth. Now that we have become acquainted with the gods of the Sumerians, let's move on to one of the most mysterious topics of their mythology, the Anunnaki. In Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki appear as enigmatic beings associated with the sky, the earth, and the underworld. They never act alone. It is impossible to imagine them as separate individuals because they are always mentioned together, as a kind of collective that makes important decisions. The most ancient texts say they were the descendants of An, the god of the sky. This emphasizes their high status, but they do not become the main gods. They cannot be compared with Enlil or with Enki, the wise god of water. The Anunnaki are more like a council of gods that decides how the world should be arranged. They gather, discuss, and approve decisions but do not participate in myths as actively as other deities. In Sumer, every great city had its patron. Enlil ruled in Nippur, Inanna in Ur, and Inanna in Uruk. But behind these powerful gods lurked the Anunnaki. They are invisibly present in religious texts, determining which cities will prosper and which will fall. It was their will that gave kings power. It was believed that a Sumerian king ruled with the blessing of the Anunnaki, and if they turned away from him, the state would fall into ruins. The most famous intervention of the Anunnaki in human destiny is related to the Great Flood. According to one version of the Sumerian myths, they gathered in a celestial council and decreed that humanity must disappear. Enlil approved this decision, and Enki violated it by warning the righteous king Ziusadra. However, despite their power, their status changed over time. While in early texts they are associated with the celestial council, in later myths they are found in the underworld. Now the Anunnaki are not heavenly judges but spirits who decide the fates of the dead. They no longer rule cities or influence kings but distribute destinies in the kingdom of Ereshkigal. So what were these beings? They never descended to people, did not enter into open dialogues with kings, did not teach crafts as Enki did. They decided but acted through other gods. They were not separate personalities, they have no myths in which they show character or perform heroic deeds. They are judges, the force that stood behind great events but did not interfere directly. They created the world and then retreated into the shadows, leaving the more active gods to rule. If the Sumerians believed that the gods were driven by passions, love, anger, the Anunnaki were devoid of these emotions. They were the law that cannot be seen but which governs everything. They could raise a city to the heavens and then wipe it from the face of the earth. The Anunnaki as ancient aliens. In recent decades, the Anunnaki have become not just ancient Sumerian deities but also the heroes of numerous pseudoscientific theories that connect them with aliens, ancient civilizations, and even genetic engineering experiments. It is said that they arrived from a distant planet, created humans in a laboratory, and used them as workers. But did the Sumerians really believe this? And how well do these hypotheses correspond to actual history? All modern theories about Anunnaki aliens originate not from Sumerian texts, but from interpretations made in the 20th century. The main popularizer of these ideas was Zecharia Sitchin. In 1976, the American writer released the book The 12th Planet, which turned the perception of the Sumerian gods upside down. You probably have a question, why the 12th? Because Sitchin also counted the sun and moon as planets. According to his version, the Anunnaki were not deities but extraterrestrial beings who arrived on Earth from a mysterious planet called Nibiru. He claimed that this planet travels in a highly elongated orbit and appears in the solar system once every 3,600 years. When the Anunnaki came to Earth, they discovered rich deposits of gold, which was vital to them. According to Sitchin, they used gold to create a protective atmosphere on their dying planet. But mining the deposits proved to be a difficult task. Then, the Anunnaki decided to create slaves who would mine this precious metal for them. According to Sitchin's version, they interfered with the DNA of primates, added their own genes, and thus created the first humans to use as a labor force in the gold mines. It sounds like the plot of an alien movie, doesn't it? But the problem is that not a single Sumerian text contains such claims. Everything Sitchin wrote is based on his personal interpretation of cuneiform tablets, and this interpretation is not confirmed by any professional scholar. In reality, the Sumerians never described the Anunnaki as aliens and never mentioned the creation of humans for the purpose of mining gold. All of this is a fantasy with no scientific evidence. One of the key points of contention is Nibiru. In his view, it was an unknown planet that appears at the edge of the solar system and sometimes crosses it. However, archaeologists and astrophysicists say that in no Sumerian text is Nibiru mentioned as a physical planet. In Sumerian astronomy, this word was used, but it denoted a bright star, or sometimes the Babylonians used this name for Jupiter. Modern astronomical observations have not found any Nibiru. Moreover, a planet with such an orbit could not exist stably in the solar system, as its gravity would destroy the orbits of other planets. In the end, the whole theory of Nibiru is based not on real data but on loose speculations that are in no way confirmed by science. The Anunnaki as divine beings were not scientists or engineers. They did not build starships or use complex machinery. Their power was not in technology, but in controlling fate and the balance of the world. No Sumerian text describes aliens, starships, laboratories, or gold mining for the Anunnaki. Everything we know about their role is related to deciding the fates of kings, distributing power, and ruling in the underworld. The purpose of humanity, to serve the gods. Sumerian mythology left no doubt in people's minds. The world was subordinate to divine will, and its main purpose was to serve the gods and maintain order and harmony in the universe. Unlike later religions where a person could hope for a reward after death, in the Sumerian worldview, everything revolved around earthly life. So that the gods would not turn away, people had to constantly care for them, build temples, perform rituals, and offer gifts and sacrifices. But how did the Sumerians imagine their origin, and why, in their opinion, did the gods create them at all? According to the Sumerian myth, humans appeared not out of the gods' goodwill, but out of necessity. In the beginning of time, the younger gods themselves worked, getting food, digging irrigation canals, and performing hard labor. But over time, they grew tired and rebelled against the elder gods. At the Council of the Gods, it was decided to find a solution, to create beings who would take on the difficult duties. Then Ninmah, the goddess of birth and creation, took clay, mixed it with divine blood, and fashioned the first humans. But the first attempts were unsuccessful. In some myths, Ninmah experiments with different forms, creating weak, sick, or ugly beings until she finds the ideal form of a human capable of work. Thus, from the very beginning, humans existed not for themselves, but for the gods. They were not granted immortality, nor were they given great goals. Their purpose was simple: to build, to plow, to erect temples, to bring gifts, and to ensure that the order of the gods was maintained. In the Sumerian worldview, humans did not possess a divine spark. They were not the chosen ones. Their role can be compared to that of workers on a huge plantation belonging to the gods. The world required care, and the gods themselves did not want to spend their energy maintaining order. They enjoyed eternity, feasting, and ruling, but they were not going to dig the earth, grow wheat, or harvest crops. That was the business of mortals. In this world, no one was on their own. Every person, from the king to the farmer, worked not only for himself but also for the great divine order. The main temples of Sumer were enormous ziggurats, giant step towers where priests performed rites and people could bring offerings. The life of every Sumerian was connected with these rituals. Everyone understood that their fate depended on the favor of the gods. Every temple, every ziggurat, every sacrifice reminded them humans were created for service, and it depended on them whether the world would be in harmony. Every nation leaves behind legends, but the Sumerians created not just stories, they left the first epics in human history, which spoke of both the gods and of humanity itself. These myths explained the origin of the world, the destinies of the gods, the meaning of life and death. Among all the stories created in Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh stands apart, the oldest literary work, which can be called the first novel about the search for immortality. This is not just a tale of heroic deeds, but a story about what it means to be human. This legend was born approximately 4,000 years ago. It traveled from oral traditions to cuneiform tablets and continues to inspire people even in our time. In Sumer, kings were considered to be appointed by the gods, but Gilgamesh was different. He was born of a mortal father, but his mother was the goddess Ninsun. Because of this, 2/3 of his essence belonged to the gods, and 1/3 to humans. This made him stronger, wiser, and more powerful than any man, but it did not give him the most important thing, eternal life. Gilgamesh ruled the great city of Uruk. He built magnificent temples and his city walls were considered insurmountable. But his character was harsh. He took whatever he wanted, oppressed the people, and exhausted his warriors with endless demands. The people of Uruk suffered and prayed to the gods for help. The gods heard them and decided that Gilgamesh needed an adversary equal to him. The gods created Enkidu, a wild man who lived among the beasts in the steppes. He drank water from the rivers, ate grass, and knew nothing of human concerns. The animals considered him their own, but fate decreed otherwise. Shamhat, a priestess of love for the goddess Ishtar, came to him and showed him what it means to be human. He drank wine, ate bread, and learned the joys of love. After this, the animals turned away from him. He became different. He became a man. He came to Uruk, and Gilgamesh met him as an enemy. They clashed in a fierce struggle. Their blows shook the city walls, and for a long time, neither could overcome the other. At the moment they might have killed each other, they suddenly realized they had become brothers. From that day on, they were inseparable. Their friendship was the beginning of great deeds. Gilgamesh yearned for eternal glory. He wanted his name to be remembered for centuries. For this, he decided to do the incredible, to travel to the cedar forest where the terrible giant Humbaba lived, guarding the sacred trees. They embarked on a long journey, traveling for many days and nights until they reached the forest. Humbaba was a gigantic creature endowed with 7 terrifying auras. A fierce battle began. Gilgamesh and Enkidu prayed to the sun god Utu. He blinded Humbaba, and then the heroes rushed into battle. With great fury, they struck the giant down and killed him. Before his death, Humbaba cursed them. He said that for their deeds, one of them would die before he could enjoy the victory. Gilgamesh paid it no mind. He celebrated, but fate was already sealed. After the victory, the goddess Ishtar noticed Gilgamesh. She offered to be his wife, promising power, wealth, and protection. But Gilgamesh refused. He knew her love was a curse, every one of her lovers became miserable. She turned men into animals and brought disaster upon them. The spurned goddess was enraged. She went to the gods and asked her father, Anu, and the great Enlil to punish him. The bull of heaven was then sent upon Uruk, a monster that no mortal could defeat. But Gilgamesh and Enkidu were victorious once again. They killed the bull and threw its carcass before the gods. But this was their final victory. The gods decided that someone had to pay for their defiance. They passed their sentence, Enkidu must die. Gilgamesh could not believe it. His friend fell ill, his body growing weaker each day. Before his death, he saw strange dreams of the afterlife, a cold, dark place where the dead wander as shadows. For the first time, Gilgamesh understood the terror of death. And so, he set out on a quest for immortality. He left his city and traveled to the edge of the world, where Utnapishtim lived, the only man who had survived the great flood and received eternal life. The journey was arduous. Gilgamesh passed through the land of eternal darkness and met the goddess Siduri, who told him, "You are human. Rejoice in life. Forget about immortality." But he did not listen. He crossed the waters of death, reached the dwelling of Utnapishtim, and asked, "How can I become immortal?" But the answer was harsh: "A man cannot live forever. Only the gods are immortal." Gilgamesh was offered a test: to not sleep for 6 days and 7 nights. If he could conquer sleep, he could conquer death. But as soon as he agreed, he immediately fell asleep. He didn't even realize how he had lost his chance. As a consolation, he was allowed to take the flower of immortality that grew at the bottom of the sea. He retrieved it and decided not to use it himself, but to bring it to Uruk and share it with the people. But when he stopped at a spring of water, a snake stole the flower, shed its skin, and disappeared. Thus, immortality was forever lost to humanity. Gilgamesh returned to Uruk. He was no longer the same man. He understood that it is not immortality that makes a person great, but their deeds. He looked at the walls of his city and realized that it was these walls that would survive the centuries. It was they that would remain after him. Gilgamesh no longer sought immortality. He understood that true immortality is the memory that remains of a person. The legacy of Sumer. The Sumerians disappeared thousands of years ago. Their cities became ruins, and their language ceased to be spoken. But their mythology did not vanish without a trace. It formed the basis of Babylonian myths, influenced the Bible, and left its mark on classical legends. Even today, we encounter its motifs in books, films, and games. Although people may not know about the Sumerians, their ideas continue to live on. The Sumerian cultural heritage became the foundation for the Babylonians and Assyrians. Instead of rejecting the old deities, Babylon reinterpreted them, making them part of its own religion. Thus, Enlil became Enlil, and became Anu, Inanna became Ishtar, and Enki became Ea. Their characters changed slightly, but their essence remained the same. However, the most important thing was not just the preservation of the gods, but the rewriting of key myths. One of them is the story of the creation of the world, which originally belonged to the Sumerians but was transformed in Babylon into a new myth, the Enuma Elish. In Sumerian texts, divine order arose from primordial chaos. The Babylonians developed this idea: now, the gods battle ancient monsters, and the victor becomes the supreme ruler of the world. Marduk defeats the primordial sea goddess Tiamat, dismembers her body, and from it creates the sky and the earth. The idea of a battle with chaos to create the world became one of the central themes in the mythology of the Near East. It can even be found in the biblical description of creation, where God separates the waters and establishes order. In Sumerian mythology, the first man, Adapa, was created by the god Enki, who deliberately did not give him immortality. In one version of the myth, Adapa travels to the sky god Anu, who offers him the food and water of eternal life. But Enki warns him that it is a trap. Adapa refuses and misses his chance. In the Bible, Adam and Eve also lose their immortality, but for a different reason. They disobeyed God by eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge. The details differ, but the essence is similar. Man could have become eternal but missed the opportunity. The Sumerian idea of creating man from clay is also repeated in the Bible. God created Adam from the dust of the ground, just as the Sumerian goddess Ninhursag molded people from clay mixed with the blood of a god. The Greeks, it would seem, lived far from Sumer, but through Babylon and Phoenicia, their mythology also absorbed ancient Sumerian archetypes. Prometheus, who gave fire to humanity and rebelled against the gods, is similar to Enki, who helps humans against the will of the celestial council. Heracles, performing 12 labors, is reminiscent of Gilgamesh, who fought monsters and left his mark on history. Odysseus, traveling the seas and descending into the underworld, repeats the journey of Gilgamesh, who sought eternal life. Even the Greek Tartarus, where sinners are sent, is similar to the Sumerian Kor, a gloomy kingdom of shadows where the souls of the dead feed on dust. The Sumerians disappeared long ago, but their stories live on. They became the foundation for subsequent civilizations, inspired religions, and created archetypes that still resonate in myths and legends today. But perhaps the main lesson they left us is the realization that while man is mortal, his stories live forever. Thank you for traveling this path with me. Thank you for your time, for your attention, and for your interest in ancient wisdom. The world of the Sumerians still holds many mysteries. Perhaps someday we will embark on this journey again. But for now, until we meet again.